Hi, my name is Caitlin Smithers, and good afternoon. Thank you for coming today, those online and here in person. So I wanted to get started by inviting you to think a little bit closer about Christian community and imagining for a moment what that might be like. What you might notice as you enter the space, or who you might see when you get there. What you might talk about or learn. Maybe how someone there's doing lately. If you could choose, what might some of these things look like for you personally as you think about Christian community? A couple of the participants shared what it was like for them. See, these are some of the quotes that I gathered. So the first participant said, "It felt like belonging again." The second said, "We just jumped into a really great level of trust." The third said, "We're able to be vulnerable, to feel safe to be ourselves." And the fourth said, "There's this real connection here." This community that I'm sharing about is Christian community in online spaces. And the title of this presentation is Error 404, Building Not Found. Because as you'll hear later in the presentation, Christian community cannot be confined, as is shared by one of the participants. So my research question was, what is the experience of engaging in Christian community in online spaces? And these experiences described are about online Christian communities. So I chose to use phenomenology, the study of experiences, to learn more about how people experience community. I wanted to focus intentionally on the personal elements people shared or identified that mattered to them in Christian communities that they were a part of, especially in online and hybrid formats. So why Christian community, and what do I mean? Well, the concept of faithful communities is present throughout the Hebrew Bible and New Testament, as the stories that make up these books many hold dear are full of people living in relationship with one another and with God. One of the ways spoken about in these stories is related to the Greek word koinonia, which is often translated to mean fellowship, but actually means much more. It is a friendship or partnership to share and hold in common or participate in together. A community most often spoken about through Paul's letters in the New Testament, which are often written and read from a distance. Paul does not have to be physically there in the communities he writes to be considered a part of them, or seen as a leader, heard and respected in the advice and encouragement that he offers. This understanding of koinonia can still be relevant in Christian communities today, as we experience this idea of communities that are not defined by place or distance, but by the commitment and love that we show to one another. A commitment and love that God first showed us and has continued to show us as God shows up in various forms and ways since the beginning of our relationship with one another. One example of this is when Jesus became a very particular body in a very particular time and place, and demonstrated radical care and concern for the bodies he encountered, especially the most marginalized. We often still speak of Christian faith as embodied based on this story, because of Jesus and our relationship with him. However, there are many examples of when Jesus was present with the people without having to be physically there with them. One of them could come from this quote here, from the book of Matthew, chapter 25, verse 40, where it says, "I'm telling the solemn truth. Whenever you did one of these things to someone overlooked or ignored, that was me you did it for me. So we are encouraged as Christians to see the face of Christ in our neighbors, in people often overlooked or ignored, in the stories of a stranger, and those who are sick or in need. We are encouraged to see Christ virtually among us and share the love of Christ and God with one another, knowing that when we do, God is there. So as we take a closer look at this research, at the stories people shared about their experiences of Christian community in online and hybrid spaces, I wanted to share that, like many of you likely, before I did this research, I had heard critiques about online communities and how they do not provide enough chance to connect, to get to know one another or feel known. But as you can see in the theological examples I've already shown, and the quotes shown already and to be shown still, it is possible and has been evident throughout many stories of faith, of relationship and love with God and with one another. So what if there's more to the story? More to why it isn't sufficient in some cases and is more than sufficient in other cases? And what elements could have an impact on why that is the case? Well, as you probably already noticed, there is a wide umbrella of experiences that falls under the online church or online Christian communities umbrella. So I propose a couple of labels for us to use in this project, and maybe you'll find them useful going forward as well. Fully online community. 5 of these communities and 8 of the one-on-one online interviews that I conducted were with fully online communities, where their form of community exists primarily online through Zoom, including how they gather or worship. Hybrid community. 3 of these communities and 10 of the interviews that I conducted were part of hybrid communities, where their form of community was in person and online, and typically centered around a worship service conducted in a physical church building. Some had small groups that happened online as well to offer greater opportunity for connection and interaction with one another. Now, there is room for distinction and diversity of experience within hybrid Christian community, as I'm hoping I've alluded to already. There seems to be real value and gratefulness from many for this form of Christian community and the chance that it offers to remain connected, to make connections in a wider Christian community. And there does also seem to be some missing elements too. All of these communities fit into the broad definition of Christian community in online spaces that guided this research. Some of the themes that I found throughout this research were authenticity and trust, support or pastoral care, participation format, and connection and belonging. The first theme is authenticity and trust. And participants shared that elements of authenticity and trust showed up in various ways as integral to their experience of Christian community in online spaces. One participant shared, it was very open-ended, like everyone really showed up however they were that day. And there wasn't any preparation or expectations. It was a really nice place to come and listen to other people. The core elements of authenticity and trust led to a greater chance for most of the other elements described or experienced within Christian community, like a chance for deeper connection, belonging, or growing in faith, and getting to better understand one's own personal beliefs, or feeling supported and cared for. Online formats in particular seem to encourage a deep level of authenticity and trust, more than expected. Whether it was because of the online format, the participatory or interactive elements of it, or the people in these groups is hard to say, given the time, data, and the number of participants interviewed. The second theme is about support or pastoral care. This theme focuses on both support and pastoral care in order to hopefully best capture the wide variety of ways people described showing up for one another, or feeling like people showed up for them and cared about them. Often through virtual and concrete experience and presence within each other's lives. This often built onto the feelings of authenticity and trust, and created a space where people could share what was going on for them, or share what they might need. As one participant shares, it was from a hybrid community. It was fortunate and helpful when I was feeling pretty uprooted after the loss of my husband, and with much of my family living away. I felt pretty alone. The people who were there for me were church people, pastoral care folks, sending notes and cards, calling to check in, and bringing by prayer shawls. They were really there for me, and it helped me to feel connected and less alone and empty during COVID. Another example from a fully online community that a participant shares is, so during the holidays, they reached out and said, hey, if anybody has any extra time or the willingness to just be available via text, FaceTime, or phone call with some of the people in our community who are struggling, we will pair you up if you're willing. And that was one of the things that was really nice to do, is that we were intentional about making sure that no one in our community was alone or suffering in the best way we could, even if it was from across the country, even from different time zones. These are just a couple of the stories that I heard from people who shared how they showed up for one another in creative and concrete ways, whether in person or online. The third theme is participation format, because there are a variety of participation formats represented within these 8 Christian communities in this research, 3 hybrid and 5 online, and each with their own specific structure, with some similarities in the ways they participated in the act of forming Christian community together. One participant shares, we are trying to build a community, and so it's not really the programming that I want to point to, as this is what the community is. What this place is a network of relationships, of the people who make up this community. That is what the stuff of this place is. So we do have to do things to facilitate those relationships, though, to build the connections, to build trust, to build friendship. This seems to be one of the core elements that could separate online experiences that were good enough or able to more fully provide what participants were looking for in Christian community. When a space is created where elements like checking in and getting to know one another, sharing personal stories and day-to-day experiences is built right into the model, where relationships matter, and you can tell you matter. As I alluded to already, this format can be done in fully online communities and in person, but it's hard sometimes to do in a hybrid model. Not impossible, though, so I encourage you to ask questions about that during the time we have for questions later. And I'd love to hear your stories on how you've made that more possible, because we can do amazing things together. The fourth theme is connection and belonging. According to participants, connecting and feeling a sense of belonging come from and lead to a possibility of some of these feelings and experiences. Mattering to a community, feeling accepted, seen, heard, and missed when not there. Feeling able to show up, however, and feeling like people can hold what you've shared. A deeper connection or experience of faith and the ability to explore one's own personal beliefs. One participant shares, "I have been in churches since I was 16 years old, and this is the first time I have felt truly, genuinely precious to a community, genuinely appreciated and heard, and I love that about them." A part of me wants to end the presentation right there, because I think this quote and so many of the quotes that I've shared so far speak for themselves in this research. People are really finding a place they feel like they belong in Christian communities online and in hybrid spaces. And that was really, really meaningful to hear about. But I will offer a little bit more before you finish up, because there are a couple more quotes that you might want to hear. So when it comes to feeling belonging or feeling connected, I heard that hybrid and online formats both provided accessibility for many who described feeling disconnected in the past, to feel connection and belonging within Christian community, often because of the limitations expressed in being able to connect or participate actively in Christian community in the couple of hybrid communities that I heard from. The online format was seen as more possible in an ongoing way, where the hybrid model felt temporary to some and not enough in its current format to some as well. One participant shares, "We are real people with real stories, and we're making real connections because there is genuine vulnerability happening in these places," which is really great. This brings me to my final explicitly theological point, though you have likely heard many threads woven throughout, as we are talking about Christian community, after all. There are many people who found the temples inaccessible in Jesus' time and before, and this continues to be a problem facing Christian communities today. However, it does not have to be. Within this broader understanding of Christian community and the space it can take within our lives, without having to occupy a physical and inaccessible space, comes possibilities for people who can not only take part, but can be in leadership. This concept shows that Christian communities aren't necessarily declining, so much as being invited into new spaces by the Holy Spirit, as Jesus and the Holy Spirit show examples of throughout the Bible. Christian community in online spaces is possible and quite meaningful to many. It cannot be confined, as one participant points out. This is yet another chance for the Spirit to work within communities, to be a part of the embodied work of Christ in the world, and deepen our relationships with the divine. And I hope that there's some learnings that we can take from this. First, the physical stuff, investing in equipment, in people, and in relationship building and maintaining, especially in online communities. Justice, accessibility, inclusion, and overall reach to people who may be unable to connect with community otherwise. And finally, participation. One of the core components that makes this possible for folks is the ability to interact, to feel able to participate in the wider work of the community. Seems to be what takes it from being what some might consider to be insufficient to being more than sufficient, and in fact, very special, and according to some participants, more special than they've ever experienced before. All three of these implications have an integral part in this conversation, as we, as denominations and faith communities, have in the present and moving forward, as we look at the ways that we can grow, can adapt, can build, and even as faith communities can form. As some denominations, like the United Church of Canada, have shared that they are dedicating time and money to growing. I hope we can look at how these models of Christian community can be counted, can be fostered and defined, and the parameters around friendship, and reach of the community can be explored further as part of that. Now, I know the level of technology and finances is not equitable across churches. So I pose this question back to you as an invitation. Where do you see your communities of faith being invited into something new by the Holy Spirit? And what might it look like for your community to RSVP yes? And finally, thank you. Throughout my time interviewing people who sought out chances to share their experiences of engaging in Christian community in online spaces, I heard so many stories of times people felt connected, seen, heard, and beloved, who had the chance to be there for one another and for the greater community, to learn from a wider population of voices, and seek out ways to live out our call as Christians to love one another and to love God, and to address injustice and to work towards equity for all. It has honestly been an inspiration, and it's given me so much hope for Christianity, for churches and communities in faith, as I heard of ways that people are being invited into new spaces by the Holy Spirit, as Jesus and the Holy Spirit show examples of throughout the Bible. And so I'm just so grateful for the personal experiences of Christian community that were shared that made this presentation and project possible that I'm sharing with you here today. And thank you to my research consultants and partners and everybody who supported me in this research too.